Charlotte's fist connected with the heavy bag. Crack! The sound echoed through Fort Manning's underground fight club like a gunshot. 20 conversations stopped mid-sentence. The 200-pound bag swayed violently from the impact. "You lost, Princess." Sergeant Colton Perez jumped down from the ring, his cocky grin faltering slightly as he watched the bag still swaying. But he recovered quickly, his scarred face twisting into a smirk. "I said you lost, Princess. Yoga class is upstairs, sweetheart." Charlotte turned slowly, her blue eyes ice cold. "I heard you the first time." The basement fell silent. Wolf whistles died in throats. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. This basement had been converted into a training space where soldiers settled disputes the old-fashioned way, where reputations were earned through blood and sweat, not rank or politics. Welcome to Quiet Tales Studio. Before we continue this story of underestimation, determination, and the fight that changed everything, tell us what city you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button.
Charlotte ignored the comment and walked directly to the equipment area. She'd heard about this place for months. The legendary basement where the base's elite fighters gathered after hours. No officers, no regulations, just pure combat skill. "Seriously though," Perez continued, hopping down from the ring, "this isn't a fitness club. We actually fight here. Real fighting. You might get hurt." Charlotte pulled on her hand wraps with practiced precision. "I'm not here for fitness." That got their attention. Perez was 6'2", 210 pounds of muscle and attitude. He'd been the unofficial champion of Fort Manning's fight club for 2 years, with a reputation for ending fights quickly and brutally. "Then what are you here for?" asked Corporal Ian Peterson, a heavyweight who'd played college football before joining the military. "I heard you have a tournament coming up," Charlotte said calmly. "I want in." The room erupted in laughter. Perez slapped his knee dramatically. "You want in? Lady, I've put guys in the hospital. This isn't some aerobics competition." Charlotte finished wrapping her hands and stood up. At 5 feet 7 inches and 140 pounds, she looked impossibly small compared to the men surrounding her. But her blue eyes held something that made a few of the more experienced fighters take notice. "What's your background?" asked Staff Sergeant Elias Flores, the oldest fighter in the group and the closest thing they had to a referee. "Mixed martial arts," Charlotte replied simply. "Where'd you train?" Perez pressed, still grinning. "Curves gym?" "A few places," she said, deliberately vague. Perez stepped closer, invading her personal space in a classic intimidation move. "Look, sweetheart, I don't want to hurt you. Why don't you go find some other girls to play with?" Charlotte met his gaze without flinching. "Are you scared to fight me, Sergeant?" The room went quiet. In the unspoken hierarchy of the fight club, backing down from a challenge meant losing respect forever. Perez's face darkened. "Scared of you?" He laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "Fine. You want to learn the hard way? Let's go." Flores stepped between them. "Hold on. This is a sanctioned club. We have rules. If the lady wants to prove herself, she starts with qualifying rounds like everyone else." Charlotte nodded. "That's all I'm asking for." "Qualifying rounds are tomorrow night," Flores announced. 3 fights. Win all 3, you're in the tournament. Lose 1, you're out permanently." As Charlotte gathered her gear, she could hear the whispers starting. "She's gonna get destroyed." $20 says she doesn't last 30 seconds with Martinez. Poor girl doesn't know what she's getting into. But Charlotte had heard whispers before. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she'd learned early that survival meant being tougher than you looked. Her father, a former Golden Gloves boxer, had taught her that respect wasn't given, it was taken. The next evening, the basement was packed. Word had spread throughout the base about the pretty captain who thought she could hang with the fight club. Soldiers who'd never shown interest in the underground matches suddenly found reasons to be there. Charlotte arrived exactly on time, carrying a small gym bag. She'd traded her usual ponytail for a tight bun, and her hands were already wrapped. She moved with a quiet confidence that made Flores take a second look. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly as she warmed up. "Positive," Charlotte replied, throwing a few shadow punches that cut through the air with surprising speed. Her first opponent was introduced as Rodriguez, a lightweight from the motor pool. He was cocky, dancing around the makeshift ring, playing to the crowd. At 5 feet 10 inches and 155 pounds, he had reach and weight advantages. "Try not to cry when you hit the ground, beautiful," Rodriguez taunted as Flores called them to center ring. Charlotte said nothing. She'd learned long ago that talking was a waste of energy better spent on fighting. The crowd pressed closer as Flores raised his hand. 3-minute rounds, no time limit. Fight ends when someone can't continue or taps out. Keep it clean. His hand dropped. Rodriguez came out aggressive, throwing wild haymakers designed to intimidate rather than connect. Charlotte moved like water, slipping his punches by inches, never backing up, always circling. The crowd began to murmur. "Stand still and fight!" someone yelled. 30 seconds in, Rodriguez was already breathing hard. His wild swings were burning energy fast. Charlotte remained calm, patient, waiting. It happened in an instant. Rodriguez threw a big right hand, overcommitting his weight. Charlotte ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and drove a perfectly placed uppercut into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs in a rush, and he dropped to his knees, gasping. The basement went silent. Flores began the count, but Rodriguez couldn't get up. He waved his hand weakly, tapping out. "Winner, Nelson," Flores announced. The silence stretched for another few seconds before nervous applause began. A few soldiers looked genuinely surprised. Perez's expression had changed from amusement to something harder to read. Charlotte's second opponent was introduced as Thompson, a middleweight with a wrestling background. He was smarter than Rodriguez, more cautious. He studied Charlotte as they circled each other, looking for weaknesses. "I've been watching your footwork," Thompson said as they touched gloves. "You're good, but I'm better." This fight lasted longer. Thompson used his wrestling to try to take Charlotte down, but every time he shot for her legs, she sprawled perfectly, stuffing his takedown attempts. When he tried to strike, she countered with combinations that found their mark repeatedly. 2 minutes in, Thompson's left eye was swelling shut. His nose was bleeding. Charlotte looked like she'd just started warming up. The end came when Thompson, frustrated and desperate, lunged forward with a sloppy double-leg takedown. Charlotte sidestepped, caught him in a front facelock, and drove her knee into his chest. He collapsed, and this time he didn't get up. The crowd was no longer laughing. Even Perez had stopped smiling. Charlotte's third and final qualifying opponent was the biggest challenge yet, Corporal Jackson, a heavyweight from Special Forces. He was 6 feet 4. 230 pounds, with arms like tree trunks and a reputation for never having been knocked down. "I respect what you did to those other guys," Jackson said as they prepared to fight, "but I'm not them. This ends here." Charlotte looked up at the giant in front of her. "We'll see." Jackson came out methodical, using his reach to keep Charlotte at distance. His jab was like a piston, snapping out repeatedly. Charlotte had to use all her speed to avoid getting caught. For the first minute, it looked like Jackson might be right. He was controlling the distance, landing occasional shots, making Charlotte work harder than she had in the previous fights. But Charlotte was studying him. She noticed that after his jab, he always pulled his hand back in the same pattern. After his straight right, he always reset his stance the same way. Every fighter had patterns, habits. The key was finding them. When she saw her opening, Charlotte exploded forward. She slipped Jackson's jab, ducked under his follow-up right hand, and launched herself into the air. Her flying knee caught Jackson square in the chest, and the impact echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Jackson, all 230 pounds of him, went down hard. The crowd erupted. Even the soldiers who'd been rooting against Charlotte couldn't help but cheer. Jackson was helped to his feet, groggy but conscious, and he walked over to Charlotte with newfound respect. "Damn," he said, shaking his head. "Where the hell did you learn to fight like that?" Charlotte smiled for the first time all evening. "Like I said, a few places." Flores raised her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, your newest tournament qualifier, Captain Charlotte Nelson." The applause was genuine now. Charlotte had done something no one thought possible. She had earned her place through skill, not sympathy. But Perez wasn't finished. He jumped into the ring, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Congratulations," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You beat some second-string guys, but the tournament is different. That's where the real fighters show up." Charlotte turned to face him. "Then I guess we'll find out who the real fighters are." Perez stepped closer. "You got lucky tonight, but luck runs out, and when it does, I'm going to embarrass you in front of everyone." The crowd was silent, sensing the tension. This had become personal. Charlotte looked Perez up and down slowly, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, but one that carried to every corner of the basement. "Sergeant Perez," she said, "you've been talking a lot tonight. Tomorrow night in the tournament you'll get your chance to back it up. Try not to disappoint everyone." The crowd oohed at the verbal counter. Perez's face went red, but Charlotte was already walking away, leaving him standing alone in the ring. Tournament night arrived with an electric atmosphere. The basement was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread to other bases, and fighters had driven hours to compete or watch. There was money on the table now, and serious reputations at stake. Charlotte arrived to find a bracket posted on the wall. 16 fighters, single elimination. She was matched against Martinez, a technical striker from the Airborne Division, in the first round. As she warmed up, Charlotte could feel the eyes on her. Some curious, some hostile, all waiting to see if she could repeat her qualifying performance when the stakes were higher. "Nelson," a voice called out. She turned to see Colonel Richards, the base commander, standing near the entrance. Charlotte's stomach dropped. If the commanding officer was here, the club's days might be numbered. But Richards surprised her. "I heard about what happened here last night. Word travels fast on a base this size." Charlotte waited, unsure how to respond. "I also heard you handled yourself with class," Richards continued. "That matters. Good luck tonight." He walked away, leaving Charlotte stunned. Even the base commander knew about the fight club and apparently approved. The tournament began with explosive energy. The first few fights were brutal, with skilled fighters eliminating each other in rapid succession. When Charlotte's name was called, the crowd pressed forward, not wanting to miss a second. Martinez was everything she'd expected. Technical, precise, dangerous. He picked apart opponents with surgical precision, never wasting movement or energy. But Charlotte had advantages he didn't expect. Speed was one. Every time Martinez committed to a technique, Charlotte was already moving, already countering. Her footwork was unlike anything the military fighters had seen before. Intelligence was another. Charlotte fought like a chess master, thinking 3 moves ahead. When Martinez threw a combination, she was already positioning herself for the counter that would come 2 exchanges later. The fight ended when Martinez, frustrated by his inability to pin Charlotte down, overcommitted to a power shot. Charlotte caught his arm, spun him around, and dropped him with a perfectly executed hip toss that would have made a judo instructor proud. The crowd roared. Charlotte was through to the quarterfinals. Her next opponent was Peterson, the college football player who'd questioned her background on the first night. He was bigger and stronger than Martinez, but also more predictable. Peterson tried to use his size to bully Charlotte, pressing forward constantly, throwing heavy shots. But Charlotte had fought bigger opponents before. She used Peterson's aggression against him, redirecting his power, making him stumble over his own feet. When Peterson finally left himself open, Charlotte's counter was devastating. A picture-perfect left hook that connected with his jaw and sent him crashing to the canvas. He was out before he hit the ground. The semifinals were next, and Charlotte found herself facing Thompson again, the wrestler she'd beaten in qualifying rounds. He'd made adjustments, studied tape of her other fights, come back with a better game plan. This fight was different. Thompson was more patient, more technical. He managed to take Charlotte down twice, nearly securing submissions both times. But Charlotte's conditioning was superior. As the fight wore on, Thompson began to fade while Charlotte looked fresh. The turning point came in the 4th minute. Thompson shot for another takedown, but he was tired, sloppy. Charlotte sprawled, caught him in a front facelock, and this time she was ready for the submission. Her rear naked choke was locked in before Thompson realized what was happening. He tapped frantically, and Charlotte released immediately. As Flores raised her hand, she could see Perez in the corner, warming up for his own semifinal fight. Perez's semifinal was a masterclass in brutality. His opponent, a highly skilled grappler named Adams, had been favored to win the tournament. But Perez fought with a viciousness that surprised everyone. He took punishment to give punishment, turned the fight into a phone booth brawl, and eventually overwhelmed Adams with sheer aggression. As Adams was helped from the ring, bleeding from multiple cuts, Perez turned to stare directly at Charlotte. He pointed at her, then drew his finger across his throat. The message was clear. The crowd was buzzing as preparations began for the final. Charlotte sat quietly in her corner, hands re-wrapped, breathing steady and controlled. Across the ring, Perez paced like a caged animal, his eyes never leaving her. Flores called them to center ring for final instructions. Up close, Charlotte could see that Perez was bigger than she'd realized. His reach advantage was significant, and his previous fights had shown a willingness to absorb damage that bordered on reckless. "This is it," Flores announced to the crowd. "Winner takes all. Championship fight, no time limit, same rules as before." As they touched gloves, Perez leaned in close. "I'm going to break you in half," he whispered. Charlotte looked him in the eye. "You're welcome to try." The final bell rang. Perez came out like a man possessed, throwing everything he had. Heavy hooks, devastating body shots, brutal leg kicks. His game plan was obvious. Overwhelm Charlotte with power and aggression. Make it a war of attrition. For the first 2 minutes, it worked. Charlotte was forced to move constantly, absorbing shots on her arms and shoulders, unable to establish any offensive rhythm. Perez was landing the heavier shots, controlling the pace of the fight. But Charlotte was doing something Perez didn't recognize. She was learning. Every exchange taught her something about his timing, his preferences, his tendencies. And slowly, she began to adapt. When Perez threw his signature left hook, Charlotte was ready. She slipped inside it, drove an uppercut into his body, and danced away before he could counter. The shot landed clean, and for the first time, Perez's aggressive pressure faltered. Charlotte pressed her advantage. Now she was the one, setting the pace, using angles Perez couldn't track, landing combinations from positions he didn't expect. Her speed was becoming a factor as Perez's heavy early pace began to catch up with him. 3 minutes in, both fighters were marked up, but Perez was breathing harder. His swings were getting wider, his footwork sloppier. Charlotte looked like she could fight all night. The crowd was on its feet, sensing the shift in momentum. Soldiers who'd been rooting for Perez were starting to appreciate the technical masterclass they were witnessing. The end came suddenly. Perez, frustrated and tired, loaded up on one final massive right hand, putting everything he had behind it. Charlotte saw it coming from a mile away. She ducked under the punch, stepped to his side, and drove her elbow into the back of his head as his momentum carried him past her. Perez stumbled forward, off balance, and Charlotte was already moving. Her flying knee caught him in the temple just as he turned back toward her. The impact was clean, precise, and devastating. Perez went down hard and didn't move. The basement exploded. Soldiers rushed the ring, lifting Charlotte on their shoulders. Even those who'd bet against her were cheering, caught up in the moment. Flores raised Charlotte's hand high in the air. "Your champion, Captain Charlotte Nelson." As the celebration continued around her, Charlotte looked down at Perez, who was slowly regaining consciousness with the help of the base medic. When he finally sat up, their eyes met. To everyone's surprise, Perez smiled. "Damn," he said, shaking his head groggily. "You really can fight." He struggled to his feet and walked over to Charlotte, extending his hand. "I'm sorry," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was wrong about you. You earned this." Charlotte shook his hand. "You're a hell of a fighter, Sergeant. I respect that." The crowd erupted again at the show of sportsmanship. But Charlotte wasn't finished. She climbed onto a chair so everyone could see her and waited for the noise to die down. "I want to say something," she called out. "When I walked in here 3 days ago, some of you thought I didn't belong. That I was too small, too pretty, too weak for this place." The room was silent now, hanging on every word. But fighting isn't about how you look. It's about heart. It's about getting back up when you get knocked down. It's about never giving up, no matter how hard things get. She paused, looking around the room at faces that now showed nothing but respect. Every person in this room is a warrior. We all volunteered to serve our country, to put our lives on the line for something bigger than ourselves. That bond means more than any fight, any tournament, any championship. The applause was thunderous now. Charlotte had done more than win a tournament. She'd earned the respect of the toughest fighters on the base. As the celebration continued into the early hours of the morning, Charlotte finally made her way toward the exit. Flores caught up with her near the door. "Hey," he said, "I've got to ask, where did you really train? Because what I saw tonight, that wasn't just gym training." Charlotte smiled. "You ever hear of the Gracie Academy? King's MMA? Jackson Wink?" Flores's eyes widened. "You trained at those places?" 5 years, Charlotte confirmed. "Before I joined the military, I was going to try for the UFC, but I decided I wanted to serve my country instead." Flores stared at her. "You gave up a professional fighting career to join the army." "Some things are more important than personal glory," Charlotte said simply. As she walked out into the early morning air, Charlotte could hear the conversations continuing behind her. By tomorrow, the story would spread throughout the base. By next week, it would reach other installations. The pretty captain who could fight would become legend. But Charlotte didn't care about the stories or the reputation. She'd proven what she came to prove. That respect had nothing to do with how you looked, and everything to do with what you were willing to sacrifice for it. She'd found her place among warriors, and they'd found theirs among equals. Sometimes the strongest fighters are the ones you never see coming. Sometimes the greatest victories happen in basement rooms where nobody keeps score. And sometimes, the most important battles aren't against enemies or opponents, but against assumptions and prejudices that keep us from seeing what's really there. Charlotte Nelson walked into that basement as an outsider and walked out as a champion, not because she was the prettiest or the strongest or the loudest, but because she was willing to prove herself the only way that mattered: in the fight. Tell us your story in the comments. Have you ever had to prove yourself when others doubted you? What city are you watching from today? And if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to Quiet Tales Studio for more untold stories of those who refuse to back down when the odds are stacked against them.